Colton Mercer sat behind his desk, tapping a pen against the polished wood surface as he read another customer complaint. It was the third one this week about the same restaurant location. Slow service, rude management, and employees quitting on the spot. His family had owned the restaurant chain for over 20 years, and since inheriting it from his late father, Colton had worked hard to expand it. They now had 10 locations, but the more they grew, the harder it was to keep an eye on everything. Something wasn't right at the Westfield location. He had fired a manager from another store last year for mistreating staff, and he wasn't about to let that happen again. He wanted to get to the truth himself. Colton wasn't a recognizable face to most employees. He had visited each location during openings but never worked directly with the staff. That gave him an advantage. If he walked in as a normal customer, no one would suspect a thing. The next morning, he dressed in jeans and a plain sweatshirt, throwing on a baseball cap to keep a low profile. He parked down the street from the restaurant and walked in during the lunch rush. The place was half full, but the tension in the air was immediate. A waitress in her early 20s rushed past him, balancing a tray of food with one hand and holding her stomach with the other. She looked exhausted, her face pale, her uniform slightly loose over what was clearly a pregnant belly. Colton took a seat in the corner and watched. Employees worked frantically, but something was off. The kitchen staff moved fast, but orders piled up. A few customers looked annoyed, glancing at their watches. The only person who didn't seem busy was the manager, an older man with a sharp jawline and thinning hair. He stood by the counter, arms crossed, watching everyone struggle without lifting a finger. Then it happened. The pregnant waitress, whose name tag read Paige, approached the manager hesitantly. "I just need a second to sit down. My back is killing me, and I feel a little dizzy." The manager's expression soured. "Oh, come on, Paige. You're already moving slower than everyone else. You want a break? How about you take a permanent one and quit?" Colton sat up straight in his chair, his jaw clenched. Paige flinched, gripping the counter for support. "I'm not asking to leave, just—" "I don't care," the manager snapped. "You knew what you were signing up for when you got pregnant. If you can't handle it, then don't expect special treatment." A few nearby employees paused, but no one spoke up. Paige's face turned red as she bit her lip. She quickly straightened and nodded, blinking fast to hold back tears. "I'll keep working," she murmured and hurried off. Colton had seen enough. His heart pounded as he stood up. He could have waited, gathered more information, but he didn't need to. That was blatant mistreatment. His father had always told him, "Take care of your employees and they'll take care of you." This was a disgrace. He walked straight toward the counter, locking eyes with the manager. "Hey," Colton said, his voice sharp, "that's how you talk to your employees." The manager gave him a once-over, not recognizing him. "Mind your business." Colton's lips pressed into a thin line. "Oh, this is my business." The manager scoffed. "You a lawyer or something?" Colton pulled off his baseball cap, running a hand through his hair. "No, I'm Colton Mercer, owner of this restaurant." The color drained from the manager's face. The employees nearby froze. Paige, who had been grabbing a drink from the soda machine, turned so fast she nearly dropped the cup. Silence spread across the restaurant. Colton's voice was low but firm, "And we need to have a talk, right now." The restaurant fell silent, the weight of Colton's revelation settling over the staff like a heavy fog. The manager's rigid stance faltered, his eyes darting toward the employees who were staring, waiting to see what would happen next. Colton didn't give him time to recover. "Office! Now," he ordered. His voice was low, controlled, but there was no mistaking the authority behind it. The manager hesitated, glancing around as if looking for an escape. When he realized there wasn't one, he reluctantly turned and led the way to the small office at the back of the restaurant. Colton followed, pushing the door closed behind him. The room smelled of stale coffee and burnt grease, the desk cluttered with paperwork that looked untouched for weeks. "Sit," Colton said. The manager lowered himself into the chair, arms crossed, his posture defensive. Colton remained standing, towering over him. What the hell was that out there? The manager scoffed. "What do you mean?" Colton's patience was already thin. "You know exactly what I mean. You humiliated an employee in front of customers, in front of her coworkers. She asked for a moment to catch her breath, and you basically told her to quit." The manager leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "Look, she's been dragging for weeks. The lunch rush is the busiest time of the day. If she can't keep up, that's not my problem." Colton's jaw tightened. "It is your problem. She's your employee. Your job is to lead, not belittle. And from what I saw, you weren't exactly pulling your weight during that rush." The manager's eyes narrowed. "I don't need to justify how I run my team to you." Colton let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "You don't get it. You don't have a team. You have employees scared to speak up because they know you'll come down on them." The manager rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, it's a restaurant. People come and go. If she quits, we'll replace her." Colton's stomach turned at the sheer indifference in his voice. "You think that's how this works?" He leaned forward, pressing his hands against the desk. "You think I built this business by treating people like they were disposable." The manager didn't answer. Colton straightened, inhaling deeply before exhaling through his nose. He had seen enough. "Clean out your desk. You're done here." The manager's head snapped up. "What?" "You're fired," Colton said flatly. "Effective immediately." The manager shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and—" "I can, and I just did." The manager opened his mouth to argue, but the look in Colton's eyes shut him down. His jaw clenched, and after a tense moment, he grabbed his things, stuffing papers into a worn-out messenger bag. Colton stepped back, opening the door. "You can leave through the front. Everyone deserves to see you walk out." The manager glared, but he didn't argue. He stormed past Colton, out into the restaurant, where the staff had gathered, pretending to work but clearly waiting to see what would happen. When they saw the manager with his bag slung over his shoulder, murmurs rippled through the room. Paige stood near the drink station, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. The manager didn't say a word as he walked out. The door swung shut behind him. Silence hung in the air for a few seconds before Colton turned to face the employees. "Everyone, listen up." They stopped what they were doing, eyes locked on him. "I know this place has been a mess," he admitted. "I know you've been dealing with bad management, and I know some of you probably thought no one at the top cared. But I do, and this stops today." Paige's gaze met his. There was uncertainty in her eyes, like she wanted to believe him, but didn't know if she could. Colton stepped forward. "Paige, I'm sorry for what just happened to you. What he said was unacceptable. You deserve better than that." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. I just wanted to do my job." "And you have," Colton said. "More than anyone should be expected to under those conditions." The tension in the room started to loosen. Employees exchanged glances, as if silently confirming to each other that this was real, that something was actually changing. Colton turned back to the group. "I want to hear from you. I want to know what's been going on here. What's wrong, what needs to be fixed, and what's been ignored." There was a pause, and then an older line cook spoke up. "The schedule's been a mess for months. He kept cutting shifts last minute, but then expected us to cover when we were shorthanded." A hostess added he'd take tips from the tip pool, said it was management's cut. A dishwasher muttered he used to clock people out early to save labor costs, even if they were still working. With each revelation, Colton felt his frustration grow. This wasn't just one bad moment, this was a pattern of abuse, neglect, and greed. Paige hesitated before speaking again. I almost left last week, but I need this job. I didn't have another option. Colton nodded, exhaling slowly. You don't have to deal with that anymore. Things are going to change starting today. He turned to the kitchen. First, I'm bringing in a new manager, someone who actually cares about running this place right. In the meantime, I'll be here personally for the next few weeks to make sure things get back on track. The employees exchanged surprised looks. Colton continued, schedules will be fair, no more last-minute cuts. Anyone who was shorted hours or tips will fix that, and if anyone feels like they've been treated unfairly, my door is open. Paige let out a breath, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. Colton looked around one last time. I know words don't mean much without action, but I promise you this restaurant is going to be a place where people want to work again. A quiet buzz of hope spread through the room. For the first time in a long time, things were looking up. Colton stood at the front of the restaurant, scanning the faces of the employees who had just unloaded weeks, maybe months of frustration. The air had shifted. There was no longer the stiff, tense silence that had greeted him when he first walked in. Now, there was something else, cautious hope. But hope alone wasn't enough. They needed proof that things would actually change. He rolled up his sleeves. He wasn't going to just talk about fixing things, he was going to start right now. He walked behind the counter, stepping into the workspace where employees had been scrambling moments ago. Several workers hesitated, unsure if they were supposed to move aside. He waved them off. He wasn't here to take over, he was here to help. A server with short, dark hair who had been quiet up until now cleared his throat. His name tag read Ethan. He had the look of someone who had learned to keep his head down to avoid trouble. Ethan glanced at the mess of tickets still pinned up above the grill. Orders are backed up bad, he admitted. Kitchen's been drowning all afternoon. Colton took a quick look at the setup. The fry station was overflowing with half-finished orders, the grill cook was moving at an unsustainable pace, and the prep area had barely any clean space left to work on. This wasn't just a staffing issue, this was a management failure. A good manager would have stepped in, redirected flow, and made sure the team wasn't getting buried. Instead, the one they'd just fired had apparently stood around, watching everything fall apart. Colton grabbed an apron from a hook by the sink and tied it around his waist. "All right," he said, his tone steady but firm. "Let's get this under control." The employees exchanged glances. Paige, still lingering near the drink station, looked skeptical but curious. She wasn't the only one. Colton moved fast. He wasn't a stranger to restaurant work, he'd grown up in this business. As a teenager, he had spent summers washing dishes, running food, and even working the line when they were short cooks. He hadn't realized just how much he missed the rush of it until he slid into position at the expo station, calling out orders and organizing plates. He worked quickly, directing the overwhelmed kitchen staff while simultaneously plating dishes himself. Within minutes, the chaos started to settle. The fry station cleared, the grill caught up, and servers were able to move orders out without tripping over each other. Ethan, who had been watching carefully, finally exhaled. Didn't expect to see the owner jumping in like that. Colton shook his head as he wiped a streak of sauce off his sleeve. That's the problem, you should expect it. A restaurant only works when everyone's in it together. A few of the employees nodded at that, some even looking a little more at ease. Paige hesitated before stepping closer. "If I'm being honest, I thought you'd just say a few things and leave." Colton turned to her, meeting her gaze directly. "I don't do half measures. If something's broken, I fix it." Paige studied him for a moment, then nodded. It wasn't a full shift in trust, but it was something. As the afternoon rush settled into a more manageable pace, Colton pulled Ethan and Paige aside. "I need honest input," he said. "No sugarcoating. What else has been going wrong here?" Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Schedules were always last minute. People wouldn't know when they were working until the night before sometimes. Paige nodded, and if someone called out, he never found coverage. He just made whoever was already here pick up the slack. Colton frowned. That wasn't just frustrating, it was reckless. Overworked employees burned out fast, and with how many people had already quit, he was surprised the place was still running at all. "All right," he said. "That changes immediately. Set schedules, fair shifts, and if someone calls out, it's management's job to handle it, not yours." Paige folded her arms, considering that. "You really mean that?" Colton didn't hesitate. "I do." Ethan let out a quiet breath. That'd be a first. Colton filed that comment away. It wasn't just this one store that needed checking in on. If bad management had been able to take root here, there was no telling what was happening at the other locations. For now, though, he had to focus on fixing what was in front of him. By the time evening rolled around, the restaurant was running smoother than it had in a long time. Customers were getting their food faster, employees weren't scrambling in panic, and the tension that had been suffocating the space earlier had started to ease. As Colton stepped outside for a moment to get some air, Paige followed him. She crossed her arms, shifting on her feet. "Why now?" she asked. "Why today?" Colton glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She frowned slightly. "If things have been this bad for a while, why did it take you coming in undercover to notice?" Colton appreciated the honesty. He let out a slow breath. "Because I made the mistake of trusting the wrong people to tell me what was happening. Should have been paying attention sooner." Paige studied him, then sighed. "Well, at least you're here now." Colton nodded. "Yes, and I'm not going anywhere." She seemed to accept that, giving him a small nod before heading back inside. Colton stayed outside for a moment longer, watching through the window as the employees moved around the restaurant with just a little less weight on their shoulders. There was still a lot of work to do, but for the first time in a long time, he knew for certain that he was on the right track. Colton spent the next 3 weeks at the restaurant, working alongside the staff and making sure every promised change was implemented. The transition wasn't instant. There were still moments of uncertainty, employees hesitant to trust that things would actually be different. But as time passed, the weight they had been carrying started to lift. A new manager had been brought in, someone Colton had personally vetted from one of the other locations. Her name was Danielle, and she had a reputation for running a tight but fair ship. From the moment she stepped in, she took control of the scheduling issues, ensured everyone got their proper pay, and made it clear that no one would be mistreated under her watch. Paige, though still cautious, had begun to relax into her role again. Without the constant pressure from the previous manager, she was able to focus on her job without fear of being belittled. On Colton's last official day working in the store, she approached him as he was reviewing inventory logs in the back. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed but no longer in a defensive way. "So, you're really leaving?" Colton shut the folder he had been scanning and looked up. "Not for good," he assured her. "I'll still be checking in, but I trust Danielle to handle things here." Paige nodded slowly. "It's just weird. For so long, it felt like no one cared. Now, all of a sudden, everything's different." Colton understood that sentiment. It was hard to believe in change when you'd been let down for so long. "It's not sudden," he said. "It took me too long to see what was going on, but I see it now, and I won't let it slide again." Paige studied him for a moment before exhaling. "Well, appreciate it, we all do." A voice called from the front, Danielle, asking for a status update on the afternoon prep work. Paige glanced toward the sound, then back at Colton, offering the smallest hint of a smile before heading back to work. As Colton stood, stretching the tension from his shoulders, he felt something he hadn't in a while: certainty. He had spent years expanding the business, trusting that the systems he put in place were enough. But this experience had taught him something invaluable. Growth meant nothing if the foundation was cracked. That night, after the restaurant closed, he gathered the staff for a meeting. They stood in a loose circle, looking to him with an attentiveness he hadn't seen before. He cleared his throat, making sure to meet as many eyes as possible. "I just want to say thank you," he began, "for sticking through the worst of it, for showing up day after day, even when things were unfair." A few employees exchanged glances, as if silently acknowledging the truth in his words. "I also want to say that this isn't the end of the changes," Colton continued. "What happened here made me realize I need to be more involved not just in this restaurant, but in every location. So from now on, I'll be doing regular check-ins across the company, not through district managers, directly." This got a reaction, a few murmurs, some nods of approval. "One more thing," Colton added. "I want to make sure no one ever feels like they have to put up with mistreatment again. If any of you ever have concerns, my office is open to you." Paige raised an eyebrow, arms crossed. "You mean that?" Colton met her gaze. "I do." She held his stare for a second longer before nodding. As the group dispersed, Danielle approached him. "You know, I've worked in a lot of places. It's rare to see an owner actually follow through like this." Colton exhaled. "It shouldn't be rare." Danielle nodded in agreement. "Well, it's a good start." Colton glanced around the restaurant one last time. The energy had shifted entirely from the day he first walked in. It wasn't perfect, but it was better, and it would keep getting better. As he stepped outside, he made a silent promise to himself this wouldn't be the last time he went undercover. If he had to step into the shoes of his employees again to make sure they were treated right, he would. Because leadership wasn't just about growing a company. It was about protecting the people who made that company possible. Colton didn't waste time. The next morning, he was in his office before sunrise, reviewing every district manager's reports from the past 6 months. With what he had uncovered at the Westfield location, he couldn't afford to assume it was an isolated problem. Patterns emerged quickly. Certain locations showed high turnover, with employees quitting at an alarming rate. Others had suspiciously low reported labor costs, which was now a red flag rather than a sign of efficiency. And then there were the customer complaints, some vague, some disturbingly specific. One complaint from a different location stood out. A customer had written that they saw a young server in tears after being berated by a manager. The complaint had been dismissed with a generic response. Colton felt a familiar twist in his gut. How many times had things like this happened without him knowing? He picked up his phone and started making calls. By mid-morning, he had spoken to several employees from different locations. Some were hesitant, unsure if they could speak freely. Others, after realizing he was serious, unloaded stories of overworked staff, inconsistent scheduling, and managers who ruled through intimidation rather than leadership. One thing was clear: the Westfield location wasn't the only problem. By noon, he had made a decision. It wasn't enough to rely on second-hand reports anymore. He was going to visit every single location himself. Some visits would be unannounced. Others, he would go undercover like before. But he wasn't going to let these issues fester any longer. The first stop was a location across town, one that had a high turnover rate but relatively few complaints. On paper, it looked stable enough. In reality, it was a different story. Colton arrived during the lunch rush and immediately noticed the tension. The staff moved quickly, but there was an underlying stiffness to their interactions. They weren't just busy, they were on edge. He took a seat at the counter and observed. The manager, a woman in her late 30s, stood near the register, arms folded, eyes scanning the floor like a hawk. She wasn't shouting or overtly rude, but there was a coldness in the way she carried herself. Employees barely spoke to one another unless absolutely necessary. A young server approached Colton with a forced smile and took his order. As she turned to leave, the manager intercepted her. "You're moving too slow," the manager said, voice low but firm. "Table 5 has been waiting longer than they should." The server nodded quickly, apologizing as she rushed toward the kitchen. Colton watched as the manager continued her silent patrol, occasionally correcting employees with curt remarks. It wasn't outright mistreatment, but it was clear why employees didn't stay long. There was no warmth, no sign that they were valued beyond their ability to keep up. As he ate, he noticed something else: employees barely took breaks. A few snuck sips of water between tasks, but no one sat down, not even for a moment. He flagged down another server and asked about break policies. The young man hesitated, glancing toward the manager before answering. "We get breaks," he said carefully, "just not when it's busy." Colton had heard enough. He finished his meal and left without revealing himself. This situation wasn't as blatant as what had happened at Westfield, but it was just as damaging. A toxic work culture didn't always come from screaming managers. It could come from an environment where employees felt like they were constantly being watched, judged, and pushed beyond reasonable limits. By the time he had visited 3 more locations, a clear picture had formed. Some restaurants were well run, with managers who genuinely cared. Others had issues ranging from minor inefficiencies to outright abuse of power. He wasn't going to clean this up with a few firings. This required a structural change. The following week, he gathered his entire management team for a mandatory meeting. Every district manager, every general manager, and every assistant manager was in attendance. The room was filled with quiet tension. Many had no idea what the meeting was about, but they could sense it wasn't routine. Colton stood at the front and looked across the room. "I've spent the last few weeks visiting locations," he said, his voice steady. "Some of you may have seen me, others didn't, and what I found was unacceptable." A few managers shifted in their seats. "I saw employees who were overworked, mistreated, and undervalued. I saw managers who abused their authority, who created environments where people were afraid to speak up." He let the words settle before continuing. "This company was built on the idea that employees and customers should be treated with respect. Somewhere along the way, that got lost, and I take full responsibility for that." That got their attention. A few exchanged surprised glances. "But I'm fixing it," Colton continued. "Starting today, there are new policies in place. Scheduling will be fair and consistent. Managers who mistreat employees will be removed, no exceptions. And going forward, I will be conducting surprise visits regularly." A district manager raised his hand. "With all due respect, sir, some of these locations run on tight margins. If we start giving more breaks and adjusting scheduling, we might see labor costs go up." Colton met his gaze. "And if we don't, we keep losing good employees. We keep dealing with high turnover, low morale, and declining service. That costs more in the long run." The district manager nodded slowly, seeming to absorb the point. Colton scanned the room once more. "If you're the kind of manager who values your employees, you have nothing to worry about. But if you've been cutting corners at their expense, consider this your only warning." A silence. Then, one of the general managers from a well-run location spoke. "This is overdue," she said. "A lot of us have been trying to do things the right way, but it's hard when bad managers aren't held accountable. This is what we needed." A few others nodded in agreement. Colton exhaled, "Then let's get to work." By the time the meeting ended, the shift in culture had already begun. Some managers left looking nervous, others relieved. But the message was clear: things were changing, and there was no going back. As Colton sat in his office later that evening, reviewing the next steps, he received a message from Paige. It was short, but it meant everything. "Thank you for proving you meant it." Colton leaned back in his chair, a rare sense of satisfaction settling over him. This wasn't just about fixing one restaurant. It was about rebuilding trust across the company, and he wasn't stopping until every employee knew they mattered.